Hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day. Tonight Diep collapses without warning, and Nhi's terrified whisper, "Don't go, please don't go," forces James to make a choice he can't take back. Will he truly stay when everything is falling apart, not just for Diep, but for Nhi too? Diep's knees buckle without warning. 1 second she's reaching for the kettle, trying to pretend the room isn't spinning, and the next her palm slides off the counter and she drops hard onto the floor. A sharp gasp escapes her throat, but it's not loud enough to call for help. It's more like her body finally admitting it can't keep up. "Mom!" Nhi's voice cracks as she runs toward her. James is already moving. He's out of his chair before Nhi even finishes the word. He crouches beside Diep, one hand under her shoulder, the other hovering over her cheek like he's afraid to startle her back into pain. Her skin is warm, not burning, but her eyelids flutter like she's fighting sleep in the worst way. "Diep," he says, low and focused. "Look at me. Can you hear me?" Diep tries to answer. Her lips part, but no sound comes out. Her breathing is shallow, uneven, the kind of breathing that makes you feel helpless just watching it. Nhi drops to her knees, shaking. Her small hands grab Diep's wrist like she can anchor her back to the world by holding tight enough. "Don't go," she whispers. Not dramatic, not loud, just desperate. "Please don't go." James hears it, and something inside him tightens hard. He looks at Nhi. "Hey," he says, steady but gentle. "Look at me, okay? I'm here. I've got her." Nhi's eyes are glossy and wide, fixed on Diep's face like it might disappear if she blinks. "She's tired," Nhi says, voice trembling. "She keeps saying she's fine. She's not fine." James nods once, not arguing. He lifts Diep carefully, guiding her head to his arm so she doesn't hit the floor again when her body slackens. "Nhi," he says, "can you bring me a pillow? And a wet cloth? Fast." Nhi scrambles up, nearly tripping over her own feet. The house feels suddenly too small, too quiet, too fragile. In the background, the kettle clicks off, forgotten. James shifts Diep onto the thin mat by the bed and props her slightly upright. He's trying to keep her breathing steady, trying to keep his own breathing steady too. His mind runs through everything he knows: exhaustion, dehydration, stress, the pressure of the workshop, the taxes, the paperwork, the nights she spent baking banana bread with almost no sleep. And he realizes something that makes him angry in a way he doesn't show. She didn't collapse because she's weak. She collapsed because she's been carrying everything alone. Nhi returns with a pillow and cloth, hands shaking as she passes them over. James places the pillow under Diep's head and wipes her forehead gently. Diep's eyes open halfway, unfocused, but she sees Nhi first. Her lips move. "I'm okay," she tries. "No," Nhi says immediately, sharper than she probably means. Then her voice drops again. "No, you're not." Diep's eyelids flutter. She looks toward James like she's embarrassed to be seen like this, like being cared for is a failure. James leans in. "You don't have to be okay right now," he says. "Just breathe." Diep swallows. Her hand twitches, trying to reach for Nhi. Nhi grabs it and holds on like she's afraid the world will steal it away. "Mom," Nhi whispers again, but this time she doesn't sound like she's talking to Diep. She sounds like she's talking to the ceiling, to fate, to whoever took her first mother away. "Please." The word hangs in the room, heavy. James's throat tightens. He keeps his voice calm anyway. "Nhi," he says softly, Help me get her into bed. We'll let her rest. I'll stay right here. Diep's lips part again. James, you don't... I do, he says, cutting through it gently. Not harsh, just certain. I want to. They lift her together, James taking most of her weight, Nhi guiding her legs, small hands doing more than they should have to. When Diep finally settles into the bed, she exhales like her body has been begging for permission to stop. The room goes quiet except for her breathing. Nhi sits on the edge of the bed and doesn't let go of Diep's hand. James stays standing at first, scanning the room like he's checking for threats he can't see. Then he kneels beside them, bringing his face level with Nhi's. You did good, he tells her. Nhi doesn't respond, her jaws tight, eyes staring at Diep's face like she's waiting for a sign. James lowers his voice. Has she been like this for days? Nhi swallows. She doesn't sleep, she says. She wakes up early. She works at the workshop. She talks to people about papers. She comes home and cooks. Then she bakes again. She says Tet is coming. She says we have to be ready. She says she's strong. James' chest aches at the word. And you? He asks carefully. Nhi's eyes flicker toward him, then away. I'm okay. James doesn't let her hide behind it. Not because he's pushing, but because he can see the way her shoulders are lifted, the way her fingers are white from gripping too hard. Nhi, he says quietly, tell me the truth. Nhi's lips tremble. She holds it for one more second, like she's trying to be brave, trying to be grown up. Then the wall cracks. I'm scared, she whispers. James nods slowly. Of what? Nhi looks at Diep's sleeping face and her voice comes out thin. That she will leave too. James doesn't speak right away. He lets the fear have its space because he knows it's real. He knows children don't invent that kind of fear for fun. Nhi's eyes fill. My first mom, she left, she says, stumbling over the words like she hates saying them. People say she didn't mean to, but she still left. And then Diep came, and she said she would stay. She promised. Nhi's voice rises, not into drama, but into honesty. But grown-ups say promises, and then they get tired, and then She chokes. James reaches out, placing his hand on the edge of the bed near her, not touching her yet, waiting to see if she'll accept it. Nhi wipes her face quickly, embarrassed, and that makes it worse somehow. I'm sorry, she whispers. I shouldn't say that. No, James says immediately. You should. Nhi looks at him, eyes wet and fierce. Then why do I feel like this all the time? James feels the question hit him like a punch, because he doesn't have an easy answer. He doesn't want to give her a fake one either. He inhales slowly, then he speaks, voice steady, simple, real. Because you've had to be strong too, he says, and you're too young to carry that alone. Nhi's lower lip trembles again. Her gaze drops to Diep's hand in hers. She's all I have, she whispers. James shifts closer, keeping his voice low so he doesn't wake Diep. Listen to me, he says. Tonight, you're not alone. I'm here. Nhi blinks, like she's trying to decide if she can believe it. James doesn't rush her. He adds quietly, like a promise that doesn't need a ceremony. I'm not leaving you two to do this by yourselves, he says. Not anymore. Nhi stares at him, a long, silent beat. Then her grip on Diep's hand loosens just a little, like her body is testing what it feels like to breathe again. James stays beside the bed, one hand resting lightly on the blanket near Diep's shoulder. He watches her chest rise and fall, slower now. He watches Nhi's eyelids droop, exhaustion finally catching up with fear. Outside, the village is quiet. The wind brushes the roof softly. Somewhere far away, a dog barks once and then stops. Inside the small room, a different kind of storm settles, one made of love, worry, and a promise that doesn't need big words to be real. James leans closer to Nhi and whispers, so softly it's almost a breath, "I'm here." Nhi doesn't answer right away. She just stares at him like she's trying to measure the weight of his words, like she's seen adults say things before and disappear anyway. Her lashes are wet, her breathing is shallow. She's not a child in this moment. She's a guard dog at the edge of a cliff. James doesn't flinch. He stays exactly where he is, kneeling by the bed, eyes on Diep's face, one hand resting on the blanket as if the smallest touch might keep her tethered to the room. Diep shifts. A faint sound escapes her throat, not pain, more like her body turning over in exhaustion. Her forehead creases. She's dreaming, maybe, or fighting the same fight even in sleep. Nhi tightens again. "Mom," she whispers, leaning closer. "Mom, wake up." Diep's lips move. Her eyes crack open for half a second, glassy and unfocused. "Nhi," she breathes, barely there. Nhi exhales like someone let her out of a locked room. "I'm here," she says quickly. "You're home." Diep's eyes drift toward James. The moment she recognizes him, the embarrassment returns. Silent but heavy, her voice comes out rough. "James, I'm sorry." James shakes his head immediately. "No." Diep swallows. "I didn't want Nhi to see." "I know," James says, "but she did, and she's here, and so am I." Diep's jaw tightens as if she's trying not to cry. Not because she's weak, but because she's been holding her breath for too long. She tries to sit up. James moves fast, placing a hand behind her shoulder. "Slow," he says. "Don't fight your body." Diep pauses, caught between stubbornness and relief. Then she surrenders an inch, letting the pillow hold her head. Nhi watches Diep's face like a monitor. "You didn't eat today," she blurts out. Diep's eyes close for a moment. She doesn't deny it. James stands. "Okay, water first." He walks to the small kitchen area, grabs a cup, fills it, tests the temperature, then comes back quickly. He kneels again, this time lifting Diep's head slightly. "Tiny sips," he says. Diep tries. Her hand trembles. James steadies the cup. The water touches her lips, and she swallows in small, careful pulls. Nhi leans in, voice sharp with fear and love. "Don't choke." Diep manages a faint smile, almost apologetic. "I'm fine." Nhi shakes her head hard. "Stop saying that." The words land like a slap. Nhi immediately looks guilty, as if she just broke something fragile. Her eyes dart to James, then back to Diep. Diep doesn't scold her. Instead, her face softens, and for the first time tonight, she looks like a mother who's been caught in the truth. "I didn't want you to worry," Diep whispers. Nhi's voice cracks. "I worry anyway." Silence. It's small, but it's the kind of silence that changes a room. James feels it too. He sets the cup down gently and looks at Diep, then at Nhi. He doesn't fill the space with advice. He lets the honesty breathe. Diep's eyes glisten. "Nhi." Nhi wipes her face fast, angry at her own tears. "You promised," she says, barely audible. "You promised you'd stay." Diep's chest rises sharply like she's been punched. Her eyes close, and when she opens them again, they're wet. "I will," she says. "I will stay." But Nhi doesn't relax. She's heard promises. She needs something heavier than words. James leans forward, voice low and steady. Nhi, he says, look at me. Nhi does. Her eyes are fierce now, like she's daring him to lie. James doesn't look away. Tonight your mom needs rest, he says, and you need to rest too. I'll handle the rest of the night. If she needs water, I'll get it. If she gets dizzy, I'm here. If you wake up scared, you can call my name. I will answer. Nhi holds his gaze. You swear? James nods once. I'm here. Diep turns her head slightly, staring at James, something in her expression breaking open. Gratitude, shame, love, and the fear of accepting help all tangled together. James, she whispers, you don't understand how complicated. I do, he says softly. You have the workshop, taxes, the expansion, people depending on you. His eyes flick to Nhi. And you have her. Diep's throat tightens. If I stop, everything will fall apart. James' voice drops even lower, almost a murmur. If you don't stop, you will fall apart. Diep flinches at the truth. Nhi's fingers squeeze Diep's hand again, but this time, it's gentler, like she's learning a new way to hold on. James stands again. I'm going to make something warm, he says. Not fancy, just enough. Nhi follows him with her eyes. You can cook? James lets out a breath that almost becomes a laugh. I can try. In the kitchen, he moves fast, not elegant. He searches cabinets, finds rice, finds a small pot, pours water, turns on the flame. He glances back every few seconds like the room behind him might collapse if he doesn't watch it. Nhi appears beside him, quiet now, still alert. My mom likes it thin, she says softly, pointing at the pot. James nods. Thin. Got it. Nhi hesitates, then adds, and a little salt. James looks at her. Show me. She reaches up, grabs the salt jar, and measures a pinch with surprising precision. Her hand stops shaking when she's doing something that matters. For a few minutes, they work in silence. The pot begins to steam. The smell is plain but comforting. Warm water, rice, home. Behind them, Diep shifts again. A faint groan, and both James and Nhi turn instantly. James moves first, stepping back into the room. Diep's eyes are open now, unfocused. Her hand searches the blanket like she's lost something. Nhi, she whispers. Nhi rushes in. I'm here. I'm here. Diep's gaze finds Nhi's face, and then, slowly, it finds James standing near the bed, ready. Her eyes hold his for a long beat. In that beat, something settles. Not a solution, not a miracle, just a shared decision. James steps closer and speaks quietly, like a vow that doesn't need an audience. Rest, he says. Tomorrow we face everything together. Diep's lips tremble. She tries to speak, but emotion blocks the words. Nhi suddenly reaches out, small hands moving without permission, and grabs James's sleeve, gripping it like a lifeline. Don't go, she whispers. James looks down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. He nods slowly. I'm not going anywhere. And as the pot of rice begins to simmer in the kitchen, the house holds its breath, because outside tomorrow's already waiting, and it's bringing paperwork, inspectors, and pressure. But inside, for the first time, Diep is not facing it alone.
Diep bất ngờ gục ngã vì kiệt sức ngay trong nhà, khiến Nhi hoảng loạn tột độ. Diep lập tức ở bên, bình tĩnh đỡ Diep, cùng Nhi chăm sóc cô. Trong khoảnh khắc căng thẳng ấy, nỗi sợ sâu kín của Nhi dần lộ ra. Em sợ mất Diep giống như đã từng mất mẹ ruột. Nhi thú nhận Diep làm việc không nghỉ, gồng gánh xưởng, giấy tờ, tiền bạc và Tết sắp đến. Còn em thì luôn lo lắng trong im lặng. Diêm lắng nghe, không trấn an bằng lời hứa sáo rỗng mà chọn ở lại bằng hành động. Anh nấu cháo, chăm Diệp, trấn an Nhi và khẳng định sẽ không để hai mẹ con đối mặt một mình nữa. Trong căn nhà nhỏ, giữa mệt mỏi và sợ hãi, một cảm giác gia đình mong manh nhưng ấm áp dần hình thành.